Bum 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 bum.
You're listening to Tove, a podcast about the good place and Jewish ideas. Hey, it's John Spira-Savett and Elliot Goldberg. Hey, Elliot.
Hi, John.
I'm feeling very much like Eleanor in this episode of like wanting to stall the end of the series of our Tove podcasts. So I should say for your benefit and the benefit of you who are listening that this is not the last podcast. We've got some other things in store. Coming up, we're going to have a chat with Professor Pamela Hieronymi, who is one of the philosophers who consulted to this show and who is in this episode, actually, along with Todd May, the other philosopher. They're in the scene, the seminar in Chidi's room there. And so that'll be awesome. And we'll continue to invite the fans, listeners. If you've got any things you want to throw at us or record for us, whatever, we want to make something out of that and plus more. So I don't feel an obligation that we have to like wrap up the show or even potentially wrap up this episode, which is so, as you were saying, like it's so amazing. Isn't this a great episode?
This is a great episode. I forgot how much I loved it. And then I rewatched it, again, in prep, just to make sure it was fresh. I was like, oh, I'm so glad I picked this one. Or I think it was really, I'm so glad this was the only one left when I needed to sign up for my last one.
Yeah, I have to say, like, even though, of course, you can watch them over and over on demand, I was sort of pushing off doing it. And so I was literally walking in an overcast and chilly morning, which is exactly what Chidi says is like his favorite memory of that day, walking through his old neighborhood in Paris, which is awesome. And in real time, like in the real lifetime when we're recording, as opposed to the people who are listening to this on a spaceship to Alpha Centauri, in the future, there's a lot going on in the world of great series TV conclusions like Ted Lasso and stuff.
Yeah, Succession.
At the risk of losing our especially more younger listeners, I'm just wondering if you have any recollections of great TV finales from growing up.
Well, the classic for our generation was the end of MASH.
Mm.
I don't know about in your house. During dinner, we watched the evening news. Both. We watched, NBC and then CBS. So we saw an hour of evening news. You had to see, Brokaw and Cronkite. But then MASH came on. So if dinner was, we didn't start always when the news started, but MASH was like a rerun right after the news. So we watched the news and then we watched MASH. That was like my childhood. And then there were still new ones coming out that, were prime, not dinner fare. I feel like that was the first big finale of something. And it was 2 hours instead of a half hour. And Alan Alda directed. It was almost like a movie as opposed to like the half-hour sitcom.
That like shattered me when it went off the air. We won't, again, for those listeners who aren't familiar with MASH, but that was exactly what I was thinking of. We'll put a couple of things in the notes. Some people say that was the most watched finale and continues to be in all of history. And it actually sort of the same pattern, which was of people leaving one by one. MASH was a sitcom that was set in a medical unit in Korea during the war, and that's what happened. They one by one left. And I actually started to doodle, I'll put this in the notes too, like which of those characters on MASH are parallel to which characters in The Good Place.
Yeah.
And that's sort of
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that like the big audience in part, I'm just thinking about how different that era was because there were fewer options. So people watch MASH, like everybody watched MASH.
Yeah.
And yet, it wasn't about I'm streaming. Individual shows audiences have shrunk as there are more options.
So according at least to Wikipedia, 60% of all televisions in America watched that finale the night it aired. So we don't have anything like that. They should watch that many people should watch The Good Place finale at one time or another. The other thing I will mention about TV finales is that one of at least the top 3 sitcom finales was Cheers in terms of viewership. So there's Ted Danson. And wow.
Yeah.
Cheers was a show that we would watch. My family, my dad would allow us to watch even if it was on during dinner. Yeah, classic comedy.
I watched the first 4 or 5 with my kids and they were like, wait, they're always in the bar. What's that about? Like, well, it's a sitcom. Do you know what that means? It's situation comedy. That's the situation. Like, they didn't grow up with like Taxi and Barney Miller, the sitcom. Now there are more scenes. There's more places they go.
Yeah.
In the Good Place. But it used to be the sitcom was you were in the same room for the whole show in a lot of them. There was a power to that. It was a different kind of drama or comedy.
Yeah, definitely. And so this is obviously not Jewish at all, but I think there's something about the archetype of this group of diverse people type of comedy, which has its morality dimensions, which was originally probably Gilligan's Island. There might have been something before that. I referenced that in my season 1 ending little monologue about how I even think the theme song of The Good Place, the ditty, is a little similar to the Gilligan's Island music.
That's interesting.
I'll reprise that. But anyway, I guess I should stop the stalling and we should probably jump in.
Yeah.
Elliot,
I would say, though, I found this, as I'm thinking about finales, one more thing to add. I just think about the more recent, the controversial finale was The Sopranos. I don't know if you watched The Sopranos, where like half the audience was angry at how it ended. I happen to love that finale of The Sopranos, and it made me think as I watch this one again to say, oh, people probably, if you like the show, you probably liked how The Good Place ended. Not that it was safe. I think there's a lot to talk about this episode in terms of like the questions they've been asking. But The Sopranos, like for some people, is like a 180. They got no answers and they wanted a lot of answers.
Yeah, it's neat. So I will say that one of the things I particularly loved in this episode was toward the end when Eleanor is pitching the idea to Michael of his going back as a human and saying, the truth is you don't know if it's going to still work this way. Like all this thing we've been telling you, we don't know, which is a nice thing to say to the viewer. And it does make me think one of the great series enders, I think, is the Torah, which also doesn't really end with an ending. Moshe goes up on the mountain, but then his people go on after him. And then we do a rewatch, like we immediately go back to.
Yeah. I have to say, that's my least favorite finale.
The Torah?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Like.
You are a rabbi.
I am, but no, it challenges me that Moses worked hard. He wasn't perfect, but so one, we consider God to be a forgiving God, often in Judaism, but Moses doesn't get that forgiveness. And I know there's all this stuff about transitional leadership that we like to say he had his job and now it's Joshua's turn, but like, I just want him to have a villa in the Galilee Hills. Where he could retire, like no one, his family, like the same way, the Torah says we don't know where he's buried. It could be we don't know where his villa is on which mountain, but he should get to go into Israel and live out his life there, as opposed to that's it. It's so painful to me, but every year I'm hopeful that like it'll turn out different. I go back into the. We're getting there. We're getting near the end in the Torah also now. And I'm like, this year, I know. My kids will tell you, I say this every year. God's going to forgive Moses, and Moses is going to get to go to Israel. It's going to happen this year. And then it sinks me every single Torah. It's like the most painful part of my Jewish living, reading again that Moses dies.
Wow.
I hate it.
So I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you there.
Oh, no, that's fine. I could go on and on about this.
No, I'm just thinking. Yeah, this is and this is clearly releasing us from the longer we talk, the less we have to cover the full finale in one of our Tov episodes. But I've been thinking, periodically about Michael as the Hebrew mem of Mordechai from the Purim story. But now I'm thinking of Michael as Moshe, and maybe like in this version, he's already transitioned out. Vicky is Joshua. But he gets to hang around and he also gets to work on his guitar lyrics, and then when he's ready, he goes to the next thing. So wow, that would be
he goes back to Egypt.
Interesting. That would be a cool. So you'll have to write this up as a fan fiction Devar Torah for next year when we get to this part of the Torah.
Oh, maybe. I will say, you just mentioned his song. I love the outro that they got a band to play it. They gave Michael the kavod of the honor of we're gonna produce your song. It made me laugh. Like after enjoying the whole episode, there's one more treat.
And I know that Elliot appreciates this treat, I say to you who are listening, because I've heard Elliot lead a group in Steve Martin's, what's the name of that song from his
Oh,
Be
from his.
Gentle and Gracious? No, the one that you led was the grandmother's song.
Oh, I thought I did
Be
atheists.
courteous,
Don't.
kind, and forgiving.
He has a song, Atheists Have No Songs.
That sounds good, but that's not what I was thinking of, and I just
Oh,
mostly because of the whimsy of the
got it. Well,
lyrics
this
and
one is that
vibrations.
too. Atheist has no song, no songs. It's about how every faith tradition has their songs that they sing, but atheists on Sundays they sit on their couch in their underwear and watch football. Or they sing the blues. Like it's about, if you're atheist, you don't have good
Yeah,
music in your tradition, but religious traditions have good music.
interesting. Believe it or
So
not, I'm going to
maybe it could be I did the grandmother song. I've been known to sing that. So anyway,
yes, and as to the atheist thing, I have it'll come up later when I have a mini critique of what is otherwise a beautiful scene in this
oh,
episode. But
sure.
tell us the summary, Elliot, of this episode.
All right, here we go. Chapter 52 and 53, When You're Ready, written and directed by our friend Michael Schur. The new afterlife system is working smoothly. Jason is the first of the group to decide to leave after playing the perfect game of Madden NFL. Janet leads Jason to the door in the woods. Walking through will allow him to leave. It turns out that Jason didn't go immediately, having lost a necklace he made for Janet and then spent a very long time looking for her. Tahani's parents arrive and apologize for their treatment of her and Camilla, but Tahani realizes she doesn't want to leave and asks if she can become an architect, which Michael arranges. Eleanor suspects that Chidi is getting ready to leave, so she takes him to Athens and Paris, important places from his life. Then, remembering what he has taught her, Eleanor tells him it's okay if he decides to go. Eleanor and Michael struggle to find fulfillment. Eleanor even goes to Mindy St. Clair and convinces her to enter the system. Michael tries to leave, but the door won't work for him, so Eleanor persuades the judge to make Michael human. As Michael, real man, he begins life on Earth, reveling in the simple human things he had always talked about, and Eleanor is finally ready to leave. She walks through the door and becomes a series of sparks, one of which seems to drift down to a man on Earth, who then decides to return a wrongly delivered letter to Michael. As he looks at the offer of membership to Coyote Joe's with excitement, Michael thanks the man and tells him, "Take it sleazy."
This is mostly drawn from Wikipedia's summary. I don't know who to credit for that. I didn't look that up, but it was really nice.
Wikipedia, it's from all of us. We've
Yes,
crowdsourced it. We
but
all have
not
a
all
little
of us.
piece. You don't write regularly for Wikipedia?
I have written a couple of things.
Okay.
But so, gosh, we usually laugh and we should, but I certainly cried a couple of times, even knowing what was coming, watching it again.
Yes. Me
Yeah.
too.
I think mostly when Janet was seeing off Michael, physical, the thing about the blood pressure, you have blood now.
Oh, yeah.
And, oh,
Yeah.
wow.
I had, when Eleanor says to Chidi, "Let's go to sleep, but don't, leave before I wake up."
Mm.
That was the highest number of Kleenexes
Wow.
in this episode for me.
Yeah.
Tissues, I should say.
Tissues.
Unless Kleenex would like to sponsor the podcast.
We might have to get
Now that we're done.
We have to clear
Now that we're almost
mention
done.
of
Yeah.
Kleenexes. I was very jarred to see Camilla and Tahani, to see Camilla not in her rock star / art celebrity.
Yes.
I found it was wonderfully, the visuals, the costuming changes, Tahani in her overalls and stuff like that was tremendous.
Yeah. It's not the text I chose, but now that you say that, there's a certain evening like everyone drifts back towards sort of that golden road in the middle. Like Maimonides talks about, you got to live your life between the extremes, like in the middle. And I feel like eternity in the afterlife softens your extremes.
Wow.
Except for maybe Jason, who still has to play Matt. He has to play the perfect game of. It's about the perfect game of Madden, not millions of games of Madden.
That was the other thing. So lush, that stadium VR setup or whatever he was in.
Yeah.
Or I guess, he was really in a neighborhood. Look at that. That was pretty cool.
Well, right. When your IT department are the Eternals, are the demons turned, I don't know what we call them now. They're still
Right.
demons, I guess, but they're not the demons they used to be. You can have a pretty good virtual video game system.
I even laughed and cried at the doorman's Mr. Jumpy Legs.
Yeah. Well, even though I'd seen it a million times, they pause enough to think this, but I'm like, he's gonna name him Michael. And I knew he wasn't gonna do it, but I'm like, maybe this time he's gonna name him Michael.
You know, it made me think of a sort of Frozen thing where in the song about Olaf the snowman's song about where you're supposed to hear the word puddle, put me in the sun and I'll turn into, and there's a beat, happy snowman. And so I
Oh
think
yeah.
there are a few neat moves like that. There was some, I thought, nice little drop-ins. Like, I have to say, and again, this may be again dating me for sure, aging me for sure. Early on, when they're sitting around the table, Michael and Sean and the others, and Sean was talking about how I will never, ever, 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 ever,
Ever,
ever,
ever.
whatever like this. That is a great, which I'll put in either the notes or I'll clip in here, a great callback to a Saturday Night Live debate where they were mocking President George Bush's thing about that he would never again, raise taxes, and I will never, ever, 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 ever.
Yeah.
Any great lines that you had? Any laughs?
Yes. This is, to me, feels like so obvious after the fact to like love this part, but Jason not leaving and that whole scene where he comes back after it's been many Baramies, many Baramies since he left. And so I love that scene with both how long he was there for. I love his parting, his term of endearment to Janet is not a girl. And then, Janet takes the day by saying, you've been sitting in the woods, turns out you're a monk after all.
Yeah.
I just thought that was like, it was just such a perfect end for Jason, even though I would have been complete had he not shown up again. His first end was good, but this goodbye was just so touching and funny and all mixed up. It's the right balance of all the emotions that like it's the good place at its perfect. You're laughing and crying at the same time.
Yeah, and some people have said that like Jason is the one who changes the least in a way, but he has a way of taking your breath away with these articulations. And
Yeah.
then like what you're saying about, like a monk, and he's like, "What?"
Yeah. Right.
Which was perfect. And I do have to recommend Michael Schur's interview on the NBC podcast where he really walks through this episode with Mark Evan Jackson with Sean. It's a great commentary the whole way through. I really like this thing at the end as Tahani is crossing the last thing off her list. Problematically objectify Eleanor.
Oh yeah. I love the chair. Her carpentry teacher is someone we recognize, right? Isn't that the guy from This Old House or something? Or
Oh, it's Nick Offerman.
Nick Offerman. No, he reminds me of the guy from This Old House. But doesn't he do carpentry? It's just a perfect. I don't know.
So yeah.
See, that's how good Nick Offerman was. I know him as Nick Offerman, but I was sure he was the guy from This Old House. Oh, now I'm embarrassed. Sorry, I'm cracking myself up at that. Now she's moved on to podcasts. The judge.
Oh yes, the judge. Yeah.
That still mystifies me in terms of the frame of the show. Like, why would this all-knowing being, who's still sort of in control of this whole thing, she still needs television and podcast? Like, she's still consuming human entertainment, like that.
I think that's the place where they're just mocking, religious people like us. I'm not sure there's any metaphor particularly to be drawn. Maybe a little bit. I shouldn't entirely say that.
I think it's funny because it's ludicrous that she has a very human hobby.
I also just took that, there's like a billion of them and they just keep coming, and that's what we're doing.
It is.
Just adding to the billions of podcasts in the world. I really also liked, I chuckled, when Michael is attempting to go through the door and he can't, and they're asking what he's doing.
Oh, yeah.
Turning my damn essence to the damn fabric of the damn universe. It was great.
Yeah.
It was physically great. It was verbally great. There was a neat little thing at the very end. This is not really funny or sad, but his door that he closes is red on his apartment, Michael Realman. And they've made a big thing about how, especially in the early part of the show, they never showed Michael in red at all because they never wanted to do anything to tip off that he might be a demon or a devil.
Oh,
So they had strict orders that he would never wear red and there would never anything red in his office. And so that's a really neat. Here, red, I think, is much more like blood than evil, but it was a neat little
yeah,
button on Michael's transformation from the red of the lava monster to the red of the human.
right. That's a cute scene. There's the nice callback because there was previous returning. Eleanor returns the wallet when she goes back to Earth. So I felt like he's benefiting from the kindness of another human by getting his Coyote Joe's card because the letter was lost in the mail.
Yeah.
Like I felt like that person who makes an ethical decision, there's not the point system anymore, but, has perfected that, Hashavat Avedah, returning a lost object. I thought it was nice that human encounter we see, the human there represents the good of humanity and not the silliness of humanity.
Yeah.
Which is represented in the membership card.
Which he did ask for, apparently. So that's awesome. I will get up on my soapbox here. I have to parenthetically say that some of you might be listening to what I advertised on the last episode, which is that I was speaking at the Valley Beit Midrash doing a Zoom presentation. Not so great, I don't think, that I did, of trying to encapsulate some of the big picture things that I've learned from this rewatch. But the one thing I did, at least in the preparation, which I hope I'll spin out and to figure out some way to present, are the many iterations of teshuvah, of return, and all the ways that's been my feeling of our central metaphor here about change. And you mentioned returning lost objects, hashavat avedah, same Hebrew root. But even that is, Eleanor's turning point in season 3 in Australia when she was about to leave them entirely involved her discovering that she had a letter or a wallet, I guess, that she had to return. And it seems like it's her, that sort of represents then her, in a way, tshuva essence and that spark that gets
Right.
left on that guy. And that, the idea that someone else's tshuva can sort of become your tshuva is something I've been spinning around since this morning when I thought of it.
Yeah. I also love in this scene, it didn't strike me, like Michael can't get the guitar down, let alone his command of poetry, but he gets a teacher. And that's like, it didn't strike me that his desire to perfect this in this afterlife, he was just doing it on his own. They all had access, there were all these shout outs to famous people they met in the afterlife and what they learned from them. It's like, there had to be musicians, but it wasn't until he became a person that he went to learn from someone. And, as an educator, I love that moment where the teacher says, we all need a teacher. It's the Pirkei Avot, from the Mishnah, "Aseh lecha rav u'kneh lecha chaver," right? Get a teacher, acquire friends. And that's all he needed to learn the E chord, I think it was.
Yeah.
He just needed a guitar teacher. You can't do it on your own. And for me, I think that's a great point, but it was extra because somehow it never occurred to Michael until now that he could get help with this. And I feel like that's not tshuva, but that's like personal growth for him. He got help from the other main characters on this quest for the afterlife, but it felt like that was framed more that they convinced him to do something different and then they were teammates. He was helping them with their project. This was like his project, his personal project, and he was stuck. And all he needed was a guitar teacher. And that opened it all up for him. I love that. I like that more than the other moments of him back on Earth.
Yeah. Oh, neat. I was thinking a lot about and this could be, I wrote down in my notes, Torah Palooza. Like, there's no single teaching. You've quoted a couple already. I have too. And initially I thought when I was anticipating watching the episode again that it's, okay, they're going to kind of tie things up in a bow. But in the same way that they grabbed every character and every main side player and Mindy and Donkey Dog and everybody, essentially they kind of tapped every significant teaching in a way that they had mentioned and referenced kind of philosophically and brought it back in some way while also managing to add a little more. And so in some ways I just want to make a video of labeling those things. I don't know that any one of them was they nailed a new conclusion, but they just added a little layer on each of those things.
I did want to see the next Chidi class because he had a guest teacher doing the trolley problem. I wanted to do that again. I
Yes.
just made a shout out to it, but I was like, oh, let's do that again. Let's see what, let's see how now all these people react to that scenario. I was excited, but then of course, it was just a shout out. It wasn't.
Yes, and that was actually Professor Hieronymy who said that's going to be my next class, and
Right. That's what I learned from
she's
your
coming
opening.
here. Yeah,
I learned it
yes,
from the opening. I knew they weren't regular actors. I didn't know it was a bit role by the people who
yeah,
built the show.
yeah.
That's like when there's a rabbi in a movie or something, and instead of an actor being tapped, they tapped one of our colleagues.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, like there's a wedding scene in a movie. I'm like, wait, I know that person. Because they figure better to get someone who knows how to do this as opposed to an actor to pretend how to do this.
Yes, yeah.
This was sort of that moment of let's get the moral philosophy professors and let them have their day on screen. I wonder if they have to join the union for that. Screen Actors Guild. I wonder what the rules are.
Yeah, yeah. So I will just drop in here in the spirit of my own randomness that in the scene of Chidi and Eleanor their last night, which I did love, and that was definitely a crying moment. I would say a couple of things. I'll say the critique first, and then I'll loop back to the
Sure.
thing I appreciated. The critique is that he says that, Locke and all those people are about rules and regulations, and for spiritual stuff, you have to turn to the East. And that I have to say, like, I understand why they said that, but I didn't think that was fair because, I mean, the show has been all about. It wasn't fair in both directions. One is that even that metaphor of the water and the wave, which he said so lovely,
Yeah.
at least has been incorporated into Judaism, particularly through Hasidic thought. I've read those very things by Hasidic masters and Lawrence Kushner. So we have that. But the other thing is that there are these amazing Eastern philosophers who also do ethics. And contemporary, I just want to, Amartya Sen is the one who has a book even called The Idea of Justice, which is, a work of moral philosophy in which he tries to integrate, I think, the Western notions that we're so familiar with from the major conceptions of the show with some Eastern ideas from even the classic Eastern religious texts. And I
Yeah.
attempted to start to read it, and I mean, I've attempted to read it and digest it and need to go through. But what I did, I super loved that was another tshuva moment because in season 1, it was the 5th episode where Chidi was saying how he knows intellectually that it would be a lot of good to teach Eleanor. Like he can't, all he wants to do is. What is it? I think go out in the middle of a lake with French poetry and a bottle of wine, and that we get
Yeah.
that first kind of lake scene, and now here it is again, and it's so different. I both was like took my breath away and cried, and
Yeah.
it's amazing.
I love that moment. Right. I liked how he turned to something separate from his knowledge base. But I think your critique is, I mean, it's a show that was produced in Western culture. So it was based in Western thought, but in that notion that Eastern thought, like the stereotype that was there of the two schools of thought, I like what you're saying, that wasn't accurate and did neither of them justice. And it's an oversimplification to say Western thought is this and Eastern thought is that. And your question is about Eastern, it worked for the scene and the metaphor was beautiful and where it went. But that way of thinking doesn't do justice to either tradition.
Yeah, yeah, and I would be interested for many listeners who are more familiar, way more than I am, who are hardly familiar with Eastern philosophy or religion at all, to fill that in too.
Yeah.
The idea there, in a way, loops back to something I think you want to tell us about, so I'll save my thought about the substance of it. But you mentioned before we got on a couple of things, and one of this is this figure about Eliyahu, Elijah from the Bible, and I would love for you to throw that in here.
Oh, sure. Elijah is a prophet in the Bible, and what's a unique element of his story is that he doesn't die. When his time on earth comes to an end, he's lifted up to the heavens in a fiery chariot. Sort of a mystical scene. But as a result of that, Elijah becomes a character in the folklore of different generations of Jewish imagination. And starts with the rabbis in the Talmud where Elijah comes back and visits Earth. And there are many stories about rabbis encountering him. And when they encounter him, the rabbis often ask him to help settle some rabbinic disputation about a matter of law, or ask him, like, what's God doing? And, he has some story that, there are different instances where different things happen.
Or what is God thinking?
What is God doing? What is God thinking? Or how did God respond to this thing that happened down on earth? And then it continues past the Talmud, where Eliyahu becomes a figure who, in essence, he's visiting the earth, that we each might have our own encounter with Eliyahu Navi, at, with Elijah the prophet, at a moment where we need guidance. It becomes like that mysterious stranger you meet who sets you on the right path. If that happened to you, it could be that wasn't a stranger, that was Elijah the prophet. You have your own Elijah story. But it struck me, in a way, it's not a perfect metaphor, but Michael's going back down to earth from the heavenly court. The heavens that Elijah went to are not the heavens that Michael lives in. But he manifests in human form. Actually, as I'm thinking about this, it's like the reverse of Christian theology, right? Where Jesus starts human, becomes divine. This is like going backwards. But there's a way in which Michael on earth, sort of, he's embedded there, like Elijah. Like that. We don't know the story. Maybe that's the sequel. Michael on Earth and his adventures. There's a sitcom for that, if that's what Ted Danson wants to do next. There's a Better Call Saul of the Good Place.
Yeah, there's a. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on. Yeah.
No, go ahead. That was it.
No, I was going to say that I think when you suggested this, it made me look back both to Michael, particularly back in the season 2, season 3 Hinge, Zach Pizzazz, and the one who's coming to do the nudges to get everybody to Australia. And,
right. Oh, yeah.
Reveal that they don't know that that's who it is, that it's Elijah, so to speak. And,
right. That fits better.
Yeah, but also that they all essentially become, in that season, they all become like Elijah, because they all go back to play that role for Eleanor's mom, for Donkey Doug, and all of that. And I feel like the last few episodes have been a lot also about bringing that back, that there's some connection between the existence of the people in that middle stage we're going to know about. Well, you're in the good place after you passed your test, but even if not, you go back, you encounter the good place, the heavenly test, you get something, you bring it back down. And I love this. I've really been playing with this, not even just playing with it. I mean, as I've mentioned before, even, it's been an interesting period in my rabbinic life of just a number of funerals and things, and it's really made me think about how to tap into that sense of not denying that death is real, but that there's some permeation that's going on between the realms, which I never used to think. Yeah. Certainly 10, 20 years ago, I was not into that at all. But that it does require activity on our side, and maybe it requires activity on the spirit side, the soul side. Right.
Although what's interesting to me about this is ultimately there's a way in which this afterlife that's been the redesigned afterlife, well, the original afterlife and the redesigned afterlife are not fulfilling that. At some point you're done. I mean, they are eons compared to the small amount of time you live, but it struck me that that's what Michael wants. What's the authentic life for him? He wants to be a person. And he wants to be a person, and he jumps in. His physical appearance is similar. It's whatever age Ted Danson is now, or maybe younger, because right,
Hello,
the guy
Silver
Ted Danson, and looks, he captures the youth, not of a 12-year-old, but not of his actual age, what chronological age, which I don't know what that is, but but he's stepping into Earth with human frailty, midlife, near but those, whatever those years are, 40 years, 30 years. That's the thing he wants more than anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And to me, that was a statement of, as we speculate about what that next world is and what it's like there, and the show gave us options and our tradition gives us other options. Ultimately, I found in the end, like, Michael's choice is a statement that says, and I think Judaism in a lot of ways says this in many places too, that life is about this world. Even though the next world appears in our tradition in different places, and we have our version of the point system that shows up, and we have our version of the judgment that you're going to get, but the vast majority of classic Jewish thinking is about what matters is this world. Yeah. And Michael just wants that. He wants a taste. It's like he wants a taste of this world, and he's willing to give up who he is to get that. I found that to be the most powerful thing in this episode.
Yeah, the certainty of eternity. And I think when Eleanor and Janet are talking, and I was surprised because I didn't remember this, what are your top 3 memories of this whole experience? And the only real thing that Janet said was watching you guys decide that what you should do is help others on Earth. That feels very Jewish to me.
Yeah.
And I
Janet
think
was
that's
so interesting in this episode because she's still Janet, but Janet, even the way she spoke and stood, was a flat character. There's so much complexity to her now, and I found that to be awesome. And I think like the way in which she dealt with the goodbyes, I thought it was fun to watch.
yeah, and I think that she talks about even to Jason in bed there about I don't experience time the way you do, and
Yeah,
that's certainly a perspective that the universe has. But then this other thing, the Elijah paradigm you're applying is that you can experience that connection, but you have to kind of pass through. You have to go. Elijah in our tradition has to at least kind of visit Earth in order to have it mean anything that he has any eternal life at all. And I think about how in our tradition he comes at Passover Seders or when baby boys are born
yeah,
to say, I want to check out if something redemptive is starting
yeah,
right here.
yeah. Well, have you met Eliana V on this planet?
I'm sure I have. I don't know. I don't know.
Oh,
Have
I
you?
I met Eliana V, but it turned out it was our teacher Neil Gilman before I knew him.
Oh. And he pointed you in a direction.
Well, I was sitting on the bench. I'm sure you sat on it too, outside the room where the rabbinical school interviews are. I was the last one to go during the day. So the student who was supposed to accompany me until I was my turn went home. And I didn't know the lights were on motion detectors. So I was sitting still because I was just waiting for my interview. And then the lights in the hall would go out. And then I would move and turn them on, although I didn't see the cause and effect. So I was having this weird, I'm alone in a hallway before interviewing for this panel to decide if I could be a rabbi or not. There's this weird thing going on with the lights, and a door to an office opens and a puff of smoke comes out because Neil Gilman was a pipe smoker. And this man in a trench coat with a hat, mustache and goatee or whatever he had, walks out. He walks right to the elevator in front of me, presses the button. He knows why I'm sitting there because all the students had it before the interview. He looks over at me, looks at the elevator. The elevator comes, and right before he gets in, he turns to me and he says, when you go in there, remember, we need people to be rabbis.
Ooh.
And then he walks in the elevator and he like goes away.
Wow.
And like somehow that calmed all my anxiety. Like,
Wow.
I don't know if this was, I never asked him about it, but his intention, I think, was what I understood it to mean was you're going in with all this anxiety about wanting to get in, but, we want people to get in. We're on the committee's on your side. They're not looking for a reason to keep you out. They want the answer to be yes at the end of the day. And that changed my day.
Wow.
That was I feel like that was my Eiler Navi moment. And later I learned, it was Neil Gilman who became my theology professor and someone who both his pedagogy and his theology were highly influential on me. So I felt like I had my Eliyahu Navi moment. And then I got to hang out with Eliyahu Navi because it turned out it was Neil Gilman. So
that's great.
That's my Eliyahu Navi story.
Cool. You want to bring us the next thing?
Sure. Happy to. So it's a story that's in the Talmud for those who want to look it up. It's Sechek Dubot, page 104. Ketubot is the main topic is the marriage contract, but not everything in the Talmud follows the topic of the day. And there's a story there about the last day, the day Rabbi Yehuda Nasi died. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is a rabbi from the beginning of the third century. And he's credited by the rabbis as being the editor of the Mishnah. Under his leadership, the rabbis took the oral tradition and recorded it, in part in response to the tough times they were having under the Roman Empire, which is a topic for a different podcast, maybe. But his death is a big loss because he was a leader that helped transform Judaism and give us a text of the oral law, which led to centuries of discussion, debate, guidance for how Jews should live.
And it was essentially revising the whole system as the good place is.
Oh, nice. Nice. He helped transform Judaism from a temple-based, this project helped transform Judaism from a temple-based Judaism with no temple because it was gone, to rabbinic Judaism, which in some way, shape, or form, all modern Judaism comes from in some way, even those that are further away from it. And the rabbis are distraught by the fact that he's dying, his colleagues. So they declare public fasts and they pray for mercy to the heavens so that he won't die, that God won't take him. And even to the point that they say, anyone who says that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi has died will be stabbed with a sword. They issue an edict. If you utter the fact that he's dead, or he's already dead, or he's dead, like, in this condition that he's in, we're gonna stab you with the sword, which it's a little violent for the rabbis, but it's the severity of that. So the story says his maidservant goes up to the roof of his house, where there's no air conditioning in those days, probably to get some air, clear her head, but it's up to the roof, maybe closer to heaven, and she prays. But first she reflects. The heavens are requesting Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. The heaven, right? God is requesting him. We see that because he's dying. And the lower realm, earth, the people on earth are requesting him because the rabbis are praying to keep him alive. And she prays, may it be the will of God that the lower world should impose their will on the upper world. Let Rabbi Yehuda Nasi stay alive. People should win out over God on this. But then she watches him take off his tefillin, his phylacteries, which the rabbis, modern day Jews who wear tefillin, wear them for the morning service. In the rabbinic times, we read about the tradition that they wore them all day, but not when they went to the bathroom. So like he would get up from his sickbed to go to the bathroom, he would have to unwrap these straps from his arm and take it off his head. And she saw how much of a struggle it was to get up. He was suffering from an intestinal disease. So he was, I guess, moving from his bed to the, outhouse, whatever it was in the day. And she sees how much he's suffering, and she changes her prayer and says, may it be the will of God that the upper worlds impose their will on the lower worlds. And so this is one moment I thought connected, where it's not about the person realizing that they're done and time to move on, but here it's the caregiver. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's maidservant realizes it's time for him to go and is at peace with it. But there's one more piece to the story. The rabbis won't stop praying, and the text implies the prayer is effective. So he's kept alive because of the prayer. So what does she do while she's on the roof? She takes this big jug, which must have been ceramic, throws it off the roof, and it shatters on the ground and makes this loud noise. The rabbis stop their prayer to look. It's like a instinctual reaction we have when you hear a bus backfire, right, or something. You stop and you turn and you look, and that pause in their prayer is the moment that God seizes upon, according to the story, and that's when he dies and moves on. So it struck me that this story is about some of the themes of the show, knowing, but it's the afterlife in the good place, not life, but knowing when you're done and when you're complete and when it's time to move on. And some of it's about the Eleanor Chidi story about you might be ready, but the people who love you aren't. And how do you deal with that difference of opinion? Whose decision is it anyways? And in our realm, which this story is written in, I think it speaks to us about both confronting our own mortality, but also those of loved ones, about when do we have to let go because it's time for the person to go. There's something about this story that really resonated with so many parts of this episode and the questions it's asking, even though the contexts are so different.
Yeah, I really like that juxtaposition, because I was very struck in this episode how much of the conversation was, it was seemingly about when do I think I'm done with my project of existence, but how much that was really wrapped up with what do I mean to other people. And like even Tahani defining her project is like, okay, I've reconciled with my parents. How many times can we sit there together and listen to them say, I love you?
Right.
And that's the question, like that's in play. It's a real question.
Yeah.
For some people, that is the thing. Yes. Why would you put that to an end? Like, that's a real question you have to have an answer to. And the story, I guess, doesn't say about Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Yehuda, whether he has a view about it. Is he done?
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't know. We know he's suffering, but he doesn't, right? He doesn't speak in the story. This is about the perspective of others. But there was a lot. I mean, we didn't hear from the only, with Chidi and Eleanor, we hear from both. And then with Janet and Jason.
Yeah.
In some ways, what strikes me about this story in contrast to Janet, in some ways, Janet has it best because she doesn't experience time. She doesn't really lose her encounter with Jason when he goes, because the memories are the same as living them.
Yeah, it's interesting because what she's saying is that we know, actually, even from neuroscience, that the brain has a different experience of remembering something and living through it. There's some wonderful stuff that Daniel Kahneman has talked about. His TED Talk on the Thinking Fast and Slow has got some great stuff on that. So in that sense, like it's real for her. But when Janet has to think about letting go of Michael, that's the one place where, like
Oh yeah,
they have the same reality or
yeah,
the same experience of Baramy time. And I guess
right.
that's when it affects her.
Well, she goes into like parent mode. She's like, I felt like she was his mom then,
Yeah.
and she didn't do that to Jay. Her relationship with Jason is different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And interesting because I think as I'm thinking about this, the way you're describing and reminding us too about Rebbe Yehuda Anasi is that his whole thing essentially was that he came up with a way for the memories to be alive. Things are preserved in a memorable way in the Mishnah for his students and in the
yeah,
name of the people who say them. And we have all these teachings about a person who says something in the name of the teacher who said it.
yeah,
It's like they're giving them life again. So super interesting. And
yeah. Well, and in some way, not physically, but within the tradition, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is alive and well.
hmm.
There are lots of stories about him that are compelling that we're telling almost 2,000 years later. Like, how many people get that?
Yeah. And I think the Eleanor Chidi thing is very interesting, as it would have been so interesting in the Talmudic story for the maidservant and the students to kind of get together on this, because Eleanor has her moment of reflection. She's got a book that she has read, which
Yeah,
Chidi has taught her, that helps her process like what he means to her. I'm astounded by this thought that it's in other people's, if not in other people's control, at least like other people's interest. That
yeah,
that is the primary thing, and it was I think one of the wonder, and in that way it's a very not American way of looking at this. They introduced this sense of your, as you're saying, your purpose. Have I fulfilled my existence
right.
in the universe to all it? But there's nothing individual about that. And except for Mindy St. Clair, and we didn't mention this before, like that was the other crying
Oh, yeah,
moment. I'm so glad that they did that because she represents the voice of someone who can't even see herself as being worth herself or anybody else considering. And
right.
so that conversation couldn't even take place until Eleanor found a way to connect with her. It couldn't even open that conversation.
She was the one person outside the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now you
I
could say
wa-
nobody is outside the system. Yeah.
right. I wonder, you made me think of this when you talked about Tahani and she's finishing her list and like the things that she needed to repair or redeem or tshuva, whatever
Like I think repave a
happened.
driveway was one.
Yeah. But even like with her
Yeah.
parents and her
Yeah.
sister and all that, or like Eleanor was back with her friends. They've come back to like over however many Baramies. Now they're just co-inhabitants of the place. But it struck me at like the time before the old system, how it broke, because if you got to the real good place, eventually your mind went numb because so this was better, but still, I don't know, it made me think of like they mentioned Shakespeare. Did you hear Shakespeare went through the portal? And then the response is like, well, thank God, because his plays, aren't as good as the original ones. They make some joke about the sequel to I forget which one,
Yeah.
some ridiculous thing. But struck me as like there's something to it that like we have well, in Jewish tradition we have 120 years, but whatever. We have a lifespan for our creativity, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's it. Because it's bound that way, and our life is the way it is. We have to do it in that period. That it's not that Shakespeare went on to continue to be great. He did his great stuff during his life. And when he got to this place, that's the reward that he could be at forever. He couldn't recreate the creativity.
Yeah, and this was my issue with the wave metaphor as being kind of the final word. If it really is all that, it's just a different way for water to be for a little while. And again, the way William Jackson Harper said that line was so amazing. But if that's all that it was, it doesn't really matter what state you're in. Then what's really at stake, in any of this? There's no choice. You don't get to choose which wave you're a part
Yeah.
of. But there is so much more at stake. It matters. The choices each of them make about what they're going to do and when does matter. I think that it actually does. Like, that's what I want to believe about my existence.
Yeah.
And what I like about the good place generally is the sense that, okay, there's that 120 years, so to speak, that you say, but then there's something else, like there's sort of a lingering effect. I think I'm going to have like infinite, that there's room for my consciousness. The more time goes on, the more, even now, my thoughts, my projects are, I didn't invent them. They're situated in my time and place, in my life and my relationships, but they're not utterly unique. and the universe could, would probably more or less be about the same if I didn't have them. And the ocean would be okay without one little drop of water. It'd be pretty much the same. But we do get the sense from ourselves, I don't myself, speaking for myself, and then from the show that like it does matter. Tahani being an architect matters.
Yeah.
And when Chidi decides it's time, it does matter. I don't know
Yeah.
how you would know. I mean, it does flip back to the individual. Like, how do you know? And in that sense, I like that. That was the one thing. Like, really, like Jason's gonna know when he's like that seems sort of a silly way to know when you're done. The way Jason did it.
Right.
And if you're still you, you're not some abstract soul. So
Right.
I like the Talmudic story. The one dimension of the Talmudic story I do like is the sense that it's not really up to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi at all.
Yeah.
I mean, there's God and there's people around him, and his voice actually isn't there, which I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but it's cool that it suggests a picture where that's the case.
Yeah.
But I do like that Tahani gets to decide, like, I'm not going to finish. I am actually going to stay around forever.
Do
She's in
something
a way
else.
Eliyahu also, like she gets to.
Right. I wonder though, I'm just thinking about this comment is a response to what you said, less about a show, that we don't all get to be Shakespeare or Rabbi Yehuda Nasi or even Eliyahu Navi or Janet. But the impact, actually, maybe this does tie to the show, like the impact that you have. Look, I know this about you in terms of the type of person, the type of rabbi you are, from watching you do it for decades. It's like the little moments that make a difference. I like at the end, the guy finds a misdelivered piece of mail and brings it to Michael. Now that's a trivial, that sets up the joke at the end, and maybe it's trivial, but it's you as a person, John, and you as a rabbi have done so many simple kindnesses for so many people. I wouldn't underestimate the power of like one drop of water.
Yeah,
Right?
no,
There are billions of people, but
right. No, I'm saying, yeah, right. In that sense, I don't like about the water because I do think, right, the ocean is different. And
yeah,
in some ways, and you and I, in many ways, both in our professional visions and to some degree in our personalities, have similar projects. And at least for a time, our projects were overlapping quite a
yeah,
bit. And certainly there needed to be more, those projects are worth having more than one person.
yeah,
And no one of us, right? We were both teaching teenagers in Jewish day schools for a good long time, and it's not like
yeah.
we could only do as much, touch as many as we could. It was great to be a part of the same thing, and yet, yeah,
But
clearly
that,
we're supposed to be, yeah.
right. That's powerful, though. I know just 2 weeks ago, I went to ordination at the seminary. A new batch of rabbis were being ordained because it was of a great population of students that I taught in high school in Chicago. I separate from who's ever going to be a mid-career rabbi. The last of that group of students who were going to rabbinical school got ordained like 2 Thursdays ago.
Wow.
And that's a different project. Some of my projects were about institution building or curriculum writing. But as I sat there at this powerful ceremony, watching a whole bunch of people become a rabbi, but one that I had this connection to from that time, felt that power of the drop of water, knowing that, there are lots of reasons this person became a rabbi. And I was one teacher in the piece of that, but it feels like a great project that I know that I now have a couple handfuls of colleagues that come from the educational institutions in which I worked. There's a power to that. These are great people. They were great kids. They're great people. They're going to be great rabbis. And, the credit for that is them. But it was an honor to play a small part in that. There's something about where I sit now in my mid 50s looking at that saying, all right, there's a project. I helped nudge someone along the way to a career serving the Jewish people and improving Jewish lives and being there for people when they need it. It's one of those rare moments as a teacher where you feel like,
Yeah.
it was totally worth it.
Yeah. The Talmud story is nice because it, in a way, hinges both of those things so nicely that, as you say, the heavens are requesting him and the earth is requesting him. And, the earth's request is, teach us a little more. And the heavens' request is presumably help be part of this big picture, in a bigger way. And that's the perennial question. That's my personal perennial question. And it seems I read that into the Good Place show also. And that they finally, there is a universe perspective, but really it's about, they leave the points and the universal scale behind, and ultimately,
Yeah.
and this is the decision that in some sense I don't know, does the maidservant in the Talmud story make the same choice?
I think the
I don't know.
maidservant is like our four main characters.
Hmm.
Because in the story, it's sort of like a tie.
Mm.
God wants Rabbi Yonah Nasi to come to the whatever it is, whatever's the next place. And the sages have the power of prayer to keep him alive. And they're like deadlocked. And it's the maidservant. She breaks the tie. And not just breaks the tie, they don't even ask her to break the tie. She uses, she's clever. It's often in Talmudic stories.
It's Jason.
What?
It's Jason.
Oh, maybe. Right, throwing the pot, right? Maybe. But there's a wisdom.
Cocktail.
There's a wisdom to it, and what's interesting is, the place of women in rabbinic society is not a contemporary thing, but when female characters show up in stories, they often play a pivotal role and a wise one. And whether it's in the good place, it's part Jason, it's part Chidi, it's part Tahani, it's part Eleanor. They come together and do it, and they get some partners, but they change the system. And here the maidservant doesn't change the system, but she breaks the tie. There's a power to that. And it seems that from the perspective of the narrator, this was the right thing.
Say anything else about the story?
No,
any of those things?
Good. I'm complete. What about you? What did you have?
Well, I was just going to, and I don't mean this as any sort of like series wrapping thing, but I was very struck by the number of times in the episode people do say it's all good, or none of this is bad, or, it was good. This labeling. And I was thinking about pairing that with Eleanor's statement at the end about it's uncertain as to what's going to happen to Michael, and Janet's statement about the true joy is in the mystery. It's incredible that Janet could say that. That I like that labeling, and that it is sort of a return to beginnings in the sense that I hear Genesis 1, and it was good at the very beginning before anything had a chance to fulfill its possibility at all. And how at the end of every week, the last moment before Shabbat, which is going to be, our little glimpse of perfection, that we quote God looking at everything and saying, Hine tov ma'od, it's very good. It's all good. It's all very good. And I wondered, I would love to be able to ask Michael Schur if there was any little hint of that kind of echo. But I also was thinking in a practical way that it's not just important for things to be good, but for people to hear that they're good when they are.
Yeah.
And there's this teaching of Rabbi Akiva, as I'm sure I've quoted here. It's great that human beings are created in the image of God, and it's even greater that God let us know by telling us that we're created in the image of God. And hearing about something in a challenging dilemma like they have here, that it's good or none of it was bad, it was all good. It's just a nice gift, I think, also I found it as a personal gift, to think about that. What does it mean to hear it, to have someone say it to me? And then when do I need to say that? And there is kind of an ethical imperative. There are plenty of bad things that are out there and currently happening, but to label the good ones that was a nice thing for the tone of this episode.
I like that connection. I'm struck by the contrast also, though, that these statements come at the end. They designed it, it happened, they tested it for, I want to say billions of years, but it's really, thousands of baramies, right? Yeah. Whatever that equates to. I have to use it to the right scale. But the difference is, though, God says this at the beginning in the Torah. And in some ways, the story of the Torah is, despite God's satisfaction with the design, there are lots of problems. And some of it is humanity. People eat from the tree they're not supposed to. Cain kills Abel. People turn evil. Many times the world's destroyed and restarted. God picks one people. I will give one people will get it right. And, the Israelites spend many chapters irking God by making them not the choice God would have. So there's a way in which God's statements are, idealistic and premature. Whereas here they tested it. They tested, I don't know if it's the scientific method or, they didn't tweak it. They didn't show a lot of tweaking. I mean, there were some changes here and there, but something was really broken. The voice came through that said we have to change it. They lobbied for it and got it. And then they ran it for a long time and worked out the kinks. Vicky worked out the kinks.
Yeah.
Even though the demons, these new demons today, aren't really acting. They don't know what acting is. So I don't know if I can do any more neighborhoods, she says, right? But there's a surety. And I think the Torah is like speculative. Some of the rest of the Torah is like, it might not be as good as, it could have been good, but there's still other parts to it. which is like the challenge of, the question for us, how do we live the way we're supposed to live on this planet before the good place, which the show addresses some, but only with the goal of the good place. And Judaism addresses differently. But I do like the parallel you connected, but the connection you.
And I think that's why Michael gets, in your spirit, I would say that's why Michael goes back. Is something of that consciousness, as everybody else who's gone to redo their tests, has to go do more good.
Yeah.
Well, we bring this particular conversation about this particular episode to a close, but not all conversations about the good place, and not the Tov podcast, which is called Tov, which means good. And Elliot, great to talk to you today.
It was fun. And I'm glad this isn't the end of the podcast.
So more to come.
Excited to see what the creativity generates. There's certainly plenty more to touch on.
Yes.
I've seen the spreadsheet, so I know some of the ideas that are percolating.
Excellent. Thanks for talking, Elliot.
All right.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Tov. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to those who have arrived here from the very beginning of our podcast. As we've said a few times in this episode, it's not the end of the podcast, not quite. So it's still worthwhile to subscribe, to give us a good rating, and to spread the word to people you know who might find Tov interesting or entertaining. If you've joined us partway through, maybe grabbing the latest episode on your app, we've got one for every episode since Chapter 1 of The Good Place. We would love to hear from you, whether it's an idea you'd like us to address out loud, or something we can write back about. Email us at tov@tovgoodplace.com, or do it through social media at tovgoodplace. Our website is tovgoodplace.com, and we've got notes on this episode with the texts we've referred to, and also all kinds of other links and resources and short explanations. Elliot Goldberg is on Twitter at Elliot Goldberg, with 2 T's and an underscore in there. And I'm John Spira-Savett at RabbiJS3 on various social media, and with longer form material at rabbijohn.net. Thank you once again for listening. My twist on what Mark Evan Jackson says, who plays Sean, at the end of the NBC Good Place podcast. Now go learn more about something good.
Bum, 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 bum.